PT.
The Reverend Bumgardner has graced us for all our candlelight vigils and will lead us in the invocation.
We gather here tonight under the New York City Pride theme of liberty and justice for all, and in the shadow of the impending 18th International AIDS Conference, with its banner of rights here, rights now. Liberty and justice, the recognition and protection of the right to the best treatments available, and to housing and nutritional food, the right to life, in a city where over 100,000 people are living with HIV and AIDS, in a nation where 1 woman will test positive every 35 minutes, and 1 in 30 black women will be diagnosed in their lifetimes. The right to life, in a world where countries like Uganda, once touted as success stories, now have waiting lists for people to access medications and no new patient policies. We are dialing back, I read in one report, when it comes to HIV and AIDS prevention. Money, we are told, is the problem, a global recession. We must make choices. Yes, we must, but those choices are not whether to cut funding in the global fight against AIDS. The choice is whether to save lives or lose them, whether to fund some $700 billion bailing out banks, or the $6.6 billion that would allow an additional 5 million people to access HIV treatment. The choice is whether to spend $1 trillion a year fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, or fighting AIDS at a lot less cost per capita in terms of people who would benefit and a much better chance of bringing peace to this earth and a sense of goodwill among all. You know, there was a time in our history as a people where we had made the choice to put our time and our energy and our best political efforts and connections into fighting AIDS. But we've backslid, to use an old Baptist analogy. And now we live in a nation where new infection rates among gay men are up 17%. They are rising, not declining. And new infection rates among African Americans of various sexual orientations are up 12%. Now, tonight, we are living in a city with a mayor who thought the fiscally and morally sound thing to do, the only choice before us, was to cut HASA caseworkers by 1/3 and expose many of the 45,000 plus people living with AIDS and their dependents to homelessness and all the other things that happen when you don't have what you daily need to survive, food and health care. We were spared last night, but not reassured that a real choice and commitment to life was made. Medicaid could still be on the cutting block this fall, we were told, and there's 2012 and its budget before us. We can go back to the days before Uganda was PEPFAR's success story, and fully 1/4 of that population was dying of HIV untreated. We can go back to the days before mother-to-child transmission was virtually eliminated in places like Botswana. We can go back to the days when people were so sick that they couldn't sit up in church. They just stretched out across the pews and chairs to hear a word of comfort before their too-soon deaths. You know, I'm from a generation that buried the majority of gay men I knew in my age range. I did 400 funerals before most of the people I've gone to seminary with had even done one in their parishes. Many of the people MCC attempted to immortalize were my peers, and many others weren't even old enough to have had their first job or to have finished school. We can go back. We can lose another generation, or 2 or 3, because we don't want to spend the $126 million in emergency funding necessary to get people off ADAP waiting lists. or the 4 million it will take to keep 31,000 people and their 13,000 dependents alive and housed another year in this city. Or we can go forward and demand that every life be treated equally and as deserving of everything we can possibly offer toward health and wholeness and leading productive lives. We can move forward and demand right here, right now, that funding to fight AIDS, funding for HASA never again be on the chopping block, that comprehensive sex education be introduced into every middle and high school, including information on same-sex relationships, and that no kid be allowed to graduate illiterate about how to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. If a child doesn't know where to get a condom or how to put it on, if a girl doesn't know what a female condom is and hasn't been trained to negotiate for safer sex, then none of them should graduate because they're not ready for life in the world as we know it. We need to move forward and end the practice of policing for condoms as evidence of prostitution and begin the practice of telling the truth. Whether you're getting sex on the street or at home in your bed, all of us pay for sex in one way or another. There's nothing good or bad, moral or immoral about that. It's just life. It's good to remember those we've loved and lost tonight, to memorialize their lives every year. But that was only part of the promise that you and I made when we joined this battle almost 3 decades ago. I think you will remember we promised never to forget the dead and to fight like heaven for the living. And tonight we can choose once again to take up that fight. This city must not be allowed, and I do mean allowed. We are still the ultimate voice in this government. The city must not be allowed until there's a cure for HIV and AIDS to ever cut HASA caseworkers or to eliminate the cap on how much income people with AIDS on disability are assessed for rent. ADAP funding is under siege in this country, and 80% of the people on ADAP live at well below the federal poverty level. 73% are otherwise uninsured. Waiting lists, people dying because they don't have the medications they need to live, must not be allowed to pass for business as usual in a so-called scarce economic climate. It's a choice we make. The book of Deuteronomy says, we make a choice between the things that make for life and for death. Choose life. Always choose life. Demand that our government prioritize funding the International Affairs account. It represents only 1.4% of the overall federal budget. But with that money, over 2 million people living with AIDS will get treatment. And with that money, 1 million more will be spared transmission. And lots of other good things will happen. 100 million children a year will get the basic vaccinations that will save their lives. To neglect health care or HIV and AIDS is to feed the world's financial crisis, and it is just plain wrong and immoral. Here and now demand that discrimination and racism and poverty and stigma and homophobia and limited access to health care be seen and treated as risk factors and addressed. Race is not the risk factor. Racism, allowing a 50% new infection rate since 2000 to exist among people of color, is a risk factor for all of us and a crime against humanity. Insist that the president's proposal for a $28 million initiative in 2011 targeting gay and bisexual men pass. Insist that universal treatment be the goal not only in Uganda and Malawi and Kenya, but right here, right now. Demand that prisoners not be exposed to HIV and AIDS as a matter of policy, but have access to condoms. Some battles take a long time. John Eisner is our witness tonight for all you tennis fans.